Although this is an account of the events of my life, some names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the people involved. Previously on Uncoverage. After a difficult trip to Venezuela, I returned to my mother, who is living in Boulder, Colorado. In a private audience at Naropa Institute, my mother and I meet Trungpa Rinpoche for the first time. Afterward, she takes me to the New York deli, where we order our favorite dishes, kasha varnishkis and matzo ball soup. I'm Una Morera. This is a podcast about growing up as a Tibetan Buddhist in America. It was summertime, which meant riding around the neighborhood on my purple bike, named Violet, and getting into all kinds of trouble with the neighborhood kids, and then going to Dharma talks with my mother and getting into all kinds of trouble with the Dharma talk kids. For a long time, I couldn't figure out what the difference was between the two groups of kids, and then I realized one night at Sacred Heart of Jesus, on my hands and knees, in front of Trungpa Rinpoche, that it was him. We were quickly outgrowing 1111. I don't know when the community started renting the local private Catholic school, Sacred Heart of Jesus, for Dharma talks in the summers. The school was, and still is, at the top of a small hill on Mapleton and High Streets. Trungpa Rinpoche's Friday night talk was easily the most happening thing in Boulder for many years. It was also the night when the most kids would show up. Pushing on the heavy double doors of the auditorium where the Dharma talks were being held, leaving the meditators behind, we entered a school none of us attended and simply ran wild. We got to be loud while our parents remained quiet, meditating their brains out, waiting for Trungpa Rinpoche to show up. You see, it was always uncertain when Trungpa Rinpoche would show up. It could take hours, but it was always certain that he would show up. So his talks often went deep into the night, and we were unsupervised. The night was ours. We could get lawless, and we did. It was easy to develop a dislike, a rivalry, for the kids who went to school at Sacred Heart. We knew they wore uniforms, and we knew they were entirely different from us, and it would never be a school any of us would ever attend. There was nothing to protect them from us. As we flew into the now empty halls, lined with their old art from the previous school year, we zoomed around the building, unbridled as the outlaws that we thought we were, opening and investigating every unlocked bathroom, classroom, janitor closet, and office that we could find. "Let's go to the bathroom with these," Tommy said greedily one night, waving a book of matches in our faces. We all nodded in agreement. In the beginning, I didn't know any of these kids, but now I would know all of them for the rest of my life. There were probably 10 of us tonight. I only remember Teresa, Lisa, Tommy, and Tommy's little sister Helen being there. Tommy told us to follow him to the bathroom, where he balled up paper towels and toilet paper and put it into a huge water basin, which was really more of a trough with something like 20 water spigots. Everyone stood around watching Tommy as he set it on fire. When the fire got too big, he pumped his foot on a bar below the trough, which activated all 20 spigots at once. Instantaneously, the fire went out. I was mesmerized, not just by the fire, but also by the spigots. So while Tommy let us take turns with his matches making fireballs, I played with the spigots. So we lit stuff on fire and put it out with the 20 spigots until that got boring. Then we went outside. Their schoolyard was just a simple jungle gym on a bed of thick black rubber. At night, it was lit only by streetlights, so it was a little scary, but because we were together, it didn't matter. We made up games with silly songs, looped our legs over their monkey bars, and swung upside down. We taught each other how to do flips, we yelled as loud as we could, and laughed as hard. And we tried to see how many we could squeeze onto their jumbo tire swing until it stopped moving. Deep into the night, when the talk was over, the grown-ups came looking for us. They poured out of the school searching for us in the dark, with their long, spooky shadows hitting the brick school. This signaled the end of our nocturnal recess until the next Dharma program, the next Friday night. Dharma talks on hot summer nights in Boulder, Colorado in the 1970s were the best. There were also Dharma talks during the day, and sometimes none of the other kids would show up, so I would be alone and I would be bored. To entertain myself, I made up a game while Trungpa Rinpoche was talking. Starting at the back of the auditorium, I picked a color on the striped carpet and followed the stripe up to the stage where Trungpa Rinpoche was seated. It was never a straight line, which is why it was a game. The stripes had me crawling here and there, between people, around the room, on the outskirts, on the inside, closer to Rinpoche, further from Rinpoche. I purposely tried to be as disruptive as possible while making sure I was far enough away from my mother, so I couldn't get spanked or yelled at or told to be seen and not heard. No one had any shoes on, and the meditators' feet could smell pretty bad. The sock odors were mixed up with the smell of the rubber from the cheap carpet. I crawled around and saw bits of paper and lost pen lids and pieces of gravel and other little Dharma talk detritus. Looking up at Rinpoche, though, he was seated comfortably in a big chair up on the stage in front of us. I noticed between words he often pushed his bottom lip out with his tongue and then ran the back of his tongue from one side of his mouth to the other. He did that a lot. One afternoon, in the middle of my game of tracing the stripes on the carpet, I looked up at Trungpa Rinpoche on the stage. Locking his eyes into mine, he smiled at me. His tremendous lips, full and juicy, wet, gleaming, moistened with saliva, kept slowly moving. The words coming out of his mouth meant nothing to me. Yet on my hands and knees at his feet, for the first time, I noticed how strong the intensity in the room was between the people on the floor that I was crawling around and Trungpa Rinpoche. And I finally heard what they heard. His bursting lips and wet tongue smacked with something to say.
But what I'm saying here is that if you could go along with exertion and patience and this particular discipline, that you might have a chance to realize yourself, understand yourself. Maybe such understanding may be extremely boring. Such understanding maybe you don't want to do. But nevertheless, that is the case, that we can't reject ourselves before we know what we are.
The neighborhood kids that I stole candy with at the cornucopia deli on Arapahoe, stuffing it into my underwear and then hopping on Violet like a bandit and roaring away, had no idea who Trungpa Rinpoche was. They had no idea that I had so many secrets, and I wasn't ever going to tell them. No way, Jose. So in this way, my little life split down the middle. One side had Trungpa Rinpoche in it, and the other didn't. and I was too ashamed about the one to ever tell anyone about it in the other. And that feeling would stay with me my whole life. I had no idea what Trungpa Rinpoche was saying at Sacred Heart, and I don't remember how I first heard about meditation, but at some point I understood that that was what Trungpa Rinpoche was all about. My mother would tell me, "I'm going to go sit," until it slowly became clear that she was talking about meditation and that there were different words for it and that they all meant the same thing: sit, practice, meditate, and their conjugations: sitting, practicing, meditating. And somehow that was what I was both so ashamed of and intrigued by, seeing rows and rows of people quietly meditating. It was just plain weird and embarrassing, but also interesting. I was sure the rest of the world out there would think I was a weirdo, a freak, if any of them found out. Anyway, we had left the house with all the roommates and moved into apartment 210 at 1940 Canyon, which was on 19th and Canyon. It had a big, sturdy spiral staircase that led to a large loft-style bedroom, which was mine. And just like in San Francisco on Polk Street, my mother slept in the living room, which in this apartment was downstairs. The magic numbers were 9 to 12, or 2 to 5, or 6 to 9. Those were the 3-hour blocks of time when my mother would go sit. She didn't go every day, and not all 3 in one day, but that's often where she said she was going. But she also left for the evening talk, which could be any night of the week, and then she went to dharma classes and also the Nyinten, or all-day sit, and then later Shambhala training, which was an entire weekend. When she left at night to go be with Trungpa Rinpoche or to sit, she'd tuck me in, put on a classical flute music record, yell out, "I'm leaving now," and I'd call back down from the loft, from my bed, "Good night," hear her shut the door, and roll over and go to sleep with my music to keep me company. I had left Uni Hill and started at nearby Lincoln Elementary on Arapahoe Boulevard, which years later would become the home of 1111, or Naropa. After that night, on my hands and knees, when Trungpa Rinpoche smiled at me, I decided I wanted to learn how to meditate too. When I told my mother, she was surprised, and then she was nice. Her tone softened like it did when I did something that pleased her. That was good. I was assigned to May, a meditation instructor, and our first and only meeting was over the phone. "I don't have time to meet with you, but I can give you some instructions now, okay?" May said. I barely knew May. I had met her once or maybe twice. I could see her thick black hair and round face in my head as she spoke to me. "So you'll sit down on the zafu. You know how to do that, right? With your legs crossed? Okay, well, you'll sit down and tell your mom to time you for 5 minutes, okay? Then count your breaths from 1 to 10, and when you get to 10, start over again, okay? After you've done this a few times, we can talk again, okay?" May never waited for me to respond. She kind of just kept going, as she had made it clear she was fitting me in, explaining she had a kid of her own and no time. When I hung up, my mother said, "What did she say?" without looking up from her drafting table, as she was doing a print layout for an upcoming Naropa publication. It was the work Trungpa Rinpoche had promised her. After I explained what May said, I told her I was ready to go try it. I hiked up the spiral staircase, each step like a segment of an orange uncoiling up the central column, which led to the loft where my mother had made a small shrine. On it, there were 5 cups of water, 2 candles, and a picture of Trungpa Rinpoche in the center. A bowl filled with uncooked white rice held incense, with matches nearby. The shrine box was covered with a neatly folded and shiny starched satin that was the color of yellow sunlight or baby chicks. I straightened my mother's zabuton out so it was centered and a few feet away from the shrine. Then I kneaded the soft pillow-like zafu into a perfect ball and put it in the center of the zabuton. I struck a match and lit the candles and incense. When I sat down on the zafu, it crumpled and fit the form of my butt like soft room temperature butter. "Okay, you can start the timer," I called out to my mother down below. I felt my legs crisscrossed underneath me and experienced the contrast between sitting on a zafu and a chair. The red zabuton felt like a throne elevating me from the floor. I put my hands on my knees and looked at the shrine. May hadn't told me how to sit, where to put my hands, or where to look. I had picked that up from seeing people do it at Trungpa Rinpoche's talks. I started counting my breaths, like May said. 1 inhalation, exhalation. 2 inhalation, exhalation. 3, and then, with no effort whatsoever, my mind touched something powerful. I stopped counting. I stopped thinking. I was just simply there. And there was warm and calm and radiating. My mother's disembodied voice called out from down below, "Okay, it's been 5 minutes." A few minutes later, she thundered again, "Did you hear me?" because I hadn't responded. I got up and waved the fire out of the candles with my hand. I had been told we weren't supposed to blow them out. Human breath was dirty. I didn't go running down the spiral staircase. There was no, "Guess what just happened?" Not because I wanted to keep it to myself, but because there was nothing to say. Talking about it seemed stupid. Now I understood why Rinpoche was all about meditation and why my mother was doing it all the time. But that didn't mean I wanted to do it all the time. After my first meeting with Trungpa Rinpoche, the world changed again in Mrs. Sarah Person's first grade classroom. "Una, please grab your book and come sit with us," she said in front of the entire class. I grabbed my copy of Dick and Jane and felt everyone's eyes on me as I walked up the long aisle of desks from the back of the classroom to join the top reading group. Mrs. Person, like Trungpa Rinpoche, had seen me too, and it was wonderful. I had done it all on my own, just like the meditation, with barely any help and only a little guidance. After school, I rode Violet, my bike, to the public library, which easily became another one of my things to do when my mother is meditating activities. I rifled my fingers through the card catalog to look up a book, as I'd been taught by the librarian. Then I ran through the aisles, looking for a 102.1 or a 594.3. And once I found it, I sat down right there at my shrine of spines to read. I entered fantastic new worlds like Toad Hall, the great rundown Mountain View Inn, or the Spycatcher Club. Now, when I wasn't at the library or finagling dinner over at a neighbor's house, I was heating up a TV dinner and reading. When school got out in the summer of 1977, my mother announced while she packed up our stuff, "This summer I'm going to meditate for a month, Siddhadasan, at RMDC." My natural response was, "What's a Datan? And what am I going to do? And what's RMDC?" She said, "RMDC stands for Rocky Mountain Dharma Center. In Tibetan, Da means moon, and I think Tun means to meditate. So I'm going to sit for 1 moon, and you're going to childcare." We got into Prince Valiant, the name my mother had given to our new car, a 1966 Chrysler Valiant, and we left Boulder. Hours later, we turned off the pavement onto a dirt road. I sat up, feeling that we had somehow crossed a threshold. A few seconds later, we were at the top of a hill. Spread out before us, down below, was a lush scenic valley bordering a mountain at its center. We had arrived at RMDC. I learned later that the mountain was called Marpa Point. It was ornamented with conifers and crowned by a giant heap of rocks, which at that moment were lit up by late-day yellow sunlight, taking a break before moving on. My heart reacted immediately by filling up with what I don't know. I thought, being at RMDC is better than I thought it would be. But that was until we were at the bottom of the hill, where the next thing I saw was a row of dumpsters outside the back of a building. We went from heaven to hell real quick. We settled in Shila, which I learned later meant discipline in Sanskrit. It was a kind of round cabin divided into 2 separate rooms, each side with a ladder going up to a large loft. Linda, who had driven from California with her 5-year-old son, Oliver, had one side of the loft, and we had the other. The cabin had no electricity, and we relied on flashlights and kerosene lamps to see in the dark. Sheila was our home for a month, but it was also childcare during the day, which meant there were toys and books and graham cracker crumbs all over the place, and it had that daycare smell. At the start of each day, a conch trumpet rang out across the valley in long, sorrowful notes. My mother and Linda would wake me and Oliver up, and then we'd slowly walk a mile or so to what was collectively called downtown, which was a central building housing the kitchen and a dining room and the shrine room. That's where we would eat breakfast before childcare started. One morning, looking out the cabin's window, I saw snowflakes falling onto the June green landscape. "Mom, Mom, Mom! It's summertime and it's snowing!" As we walked downtown, Oliver and I ran around with our tongues sticking out trying to catch the glittering snowflakes, being hit by the sunlight. They had the same jitters as the nearby aspen leaves when a breeze shook them. Aspen leaf, jitter. Snowflake, jitter. The road dropped down and went across a stream bed, thick on both sides with undergrowth and more aspens. On one side of the crossing sat an abandoned cabin, crumpled up like the air had been sucked out of it. "Can you feel the cold?" I asked Oliver. The temperature always dropped a few degrees here. He nodded with some fear in his eyes. That part of our morning walk put a chill through me, too, but it quickly diminished as we kept walking and the landscape changed back to sagebrush. After breakfast, Oliver and I piled into a car with all the other kids and a babysitter who drove us back up to Sheila while our mothers went to meditate in the shrine room. We weren't going to see them again until lunch. As the oldest of all the kids, I got bored the fastest. On one of these monotonous days, my boredom got to me and the mischief took over. I told the babysitter I was taking some of the kids on a little hike up behind Sheila. I grabbed some matches and the base of a kerosene lamp from our room up in the loft. Leading the kids to a cluster of big, lichen-covered rocks where there were no trees, they hiked around while I looked for a place to set up the lamp. When I found a low rock that could serve me like a table, I yelled out for everyone to join me. We all stood around it as I lit a match. When it flared and came to life, Zoe went, "Ooh!" She was only 3. I liked her the best after Oliver. She frequently asked me to read to her, but only ever wanted to hear the same book over and over. Cinderella. Once I looked up from the words and noticed she was mouthing them as I read them. Surprised, I asked her if she had the book memorized. She got sheepish and kind of nodded. Testing her, I turned the page and made her tell me what it said. She knew every word. The kids knew I was doing something I shouldn't, and it captivated them. But for me, I was captivated by them, their attention. I liked the power I felt over them. Leaving the glass hood behind, I only had the lamp, the fuel, and the burner with its wick. After repeated attempts, I triumphantly got the wick lit, and we stood around watching it burn. After a bit, it wasn't enough. I wanted more danger, more power. I inched the wick out until the flame started to rise and swell. "Ooh," they reacted again. I loved it. My boredom was gone. "I wish we had something to burn," one of them said. That was a good idea, so I grabbed a handful of dry pine needles. Lighting a few at a time, we stood mesmerized as they too swelled into the flames. And then, like an unexpected siren, we were interrupted by the sorrowful, long sound of a conch trumpet roaring out across the valley. We all knew that that meant it was time to get ready to head downtown for lunch. Proudly, I marched everyone back to Sheila, leaving the rock littered with spent matches and blackened needles. A few hours later, my mother stood over me, furious. I expected her to lift her hand and ask, "Do you want me to spank you now or later?" A phrase she'd often use, which I thought was kind of dumb. I mean, who would ever say now? Whenever she said it, I had conditioned myself to say later over and over so that I talked over her question before she'd even finished asking it. But this time, she surprised me and didn't ask at all. She plain smacked me across the jaw, asking coldly, "What were you trying to do? Burn the place down?" I grabbed my smacked face and started to cry, but something inside me didn't hurt at all. It still felt good from before. Anyway, later that summer, Trungpa Rinpoche came up to teach. His house was a little brown trailer propped up across the road from Sheila. When we knew he wasn't there, we played on a deck outside his front door. Because he was crippled and couldn't walk the distance, the Dorje Kosung, members of his military who would now accompany him wherever he went, would drive him back and forth from downtown to the trailer. Once, after passing the abandoned cabin on the road at the bottom of the hill, between the stream bed and sagebrush in the aspen grove, he told the Dorje Kosung to burn the cabin down, saying it was haunted. I got wide-eyed remembering our morning walks past the crumpled-up cabin when it would suddenly become cold for no reason. Wow, I thought, Trungpa Rinpoche can see ghosts. He can see things no one else can. We weren't living in Shangri-La yet, but he was preparing the ground. It was coming. Everything had to be perfect. That's why he had to quell the evil spirits all around us first. Our theme music is Vampire Tango, written and produced by Ryder Cooley and the Dust Bowl Fairies. Buy their music at dustbowlfairies.com. That's Dust Bowl, FAERIES.com. dustbowlfairies.com. Produced and written by Una Morera. Special thanks to Mike Schoonmaker. Special thanks to Dean Haspiel and Eric Levin. Sound effects from soundstripe.com and freesound.org. The excerpt of Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche is from the Chronicle Project. Find out more at chronicleproject.com. Please share where podcasts are shared.